Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this afternoon's webinar. I'm Louise Martin from Estate Living, and I'm very excited to be here today as we talk about immigration through investment. We have today with us a team of experts, but before we go into that, let's do a little bit of housekeeping. The first thing that I just wanted to chat to you about is with regards to this webinar, as I'm sure many of us have participated in a webinar before. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a little block there that says chat. That is our little chat box that's running down the side. You are more than welcome to pose any of your questions in the chat box, and the panel will be happy to respond to those questions during the course. And of course, at the end of the webinar, we have a Q&A where we'll specifically highlight some of those questions. During the course of this webinar, we will also be running a few polls. The poll will come up onto your screen, and you will then check the box, that's your answer. Once you've completed the poll, you can then just click on the red square in the corner. There's one as an example for you. So once you've completed that, you just click on the red square and the poll will go away. For those on the panel, you can also just click on the red button and the poll will move off your screen as well. So immigration through investment is certainly a big topic, and in today's webinar, we are focusing primarily on the USA and what that looks like. So with us, we have Stuart Ferguson from 12 Star Capital, and they are a specialization company or specialist immigration company that facilitates immigration for yourself and for your family. We also have Shaun Minnie, who's a client of theirs, who's also started his business in the US. He's a South African businessman that emigrated across, and he's going to be sharing some really, really important information about the real life experience of emigrating. And to round off our discussion is always around wealth, investment, tax, and what the real process looks like. And joining us on that is Garth Wellman, and he's going to really break down what's happening on that side. So before we get going, let us show you a short video of what 12 Star Capital can offer you. Stuart, maybe I can hand the reins over to yourself as you could give us a little bit of an overview of 12 Star as a business and of course the EB-5 investment program.
Great, thanks very much, Louise. Just a little bit of background. I've been involved in US immigration through the investment visa route since 2007. So somewhat of a veteran. I am pretty proud to say that from a South African perspective, we really were the ignition key in terms of market awareness for South Africans that were seeking an immigration benefit into the US through an investment visa category. One of our sister companies is known as American Dream, and I'm sure that a lot of the people that are on the webinar are very familiar with that brand, which is now synonymous in South Africa. We recently expanded our operations to make a basket of offerings available. So within our 12 Star brand, we now offer residency programs into Portugal. And as you know, Portugal is becoming a very popular destination for a lot of South Africans. And then we've got access to Grenada. Grenada is quite a unique one because it gives a second alternative to an EB-5 into the US. And then we also have the likes of Mauritius and Malta. We do work very closely with affiliates here in South Africa. So we have a great, strong relationship with Pam Golding International, who we work very closely with on some of those other alternative programs. And then bearing in mind that from a consultancy aspect, we embrace not only assisting South Africans that are looking at a plan A or a plan B. But through our relationship with Caleo Capital and their family office, we ensure that we're able to offer them a comprehensive package in terms of questions that they may have in terms of financial immigration. And a very popular trend now is, well, we're interested, but how do we finance this option? So that's 12 Star in a nutshell. We've got corporate offices in Johannesburg, and then we've got some satellite offices in the UAE, and a very small operation in a very strange place called Vietnam. But that's us in a nutshell.
Thank you, Stuart. So let's stay on looking at what the EB-5 visa program is. That's obviously what's on everybody's lips when we look at emigrating to the USA through investment. And I'm sure that there are many different investment opportunity or investment programs, that we are focusing specifically on the EB-5. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit more about that particular, what that particular program is and what does it entail?
Correct. So EB-5 has been in existence since the 1980s. It's really a job creation immigrant visa. There are a number of other visa categories that one can consider if one is looking to enter the United States. But I think what differentiates the EB-5 is that it is designed to be an immigrant visa category. So certainly anybody who is considering relocating and reestablishing in the US, who is looking to not go through very cumbersome hurdles, but to achieve a green card, certainly the EB-5 investment visa program is by far the easiest mechanism. It guarantees you access to your green card.
So, reading up on the program, I see that there's different scales of investment. So investing in at 1.8 million and then investing in at 900,000 USD. What are the differences between those two types of investment platforms?
Yeah, so one can either invest in what's known as a TA, target employment area. That's an area that's in need of an upliftment, and that there's a certain job delinquency that needs, where there is a need for jobs. That allows you to invest at the lower threshold of 900, or the alternative would be to go into a $1.8 million investment. So typically most of our applications are going at the TA opportunity at the 900 threshold, because it's a lower threshold and it achieves exactly the same objective.
And is there a difference in the risk category of the different types of investments? I know we've spoken before, the higher, it's a lower risk category, lower risk, lower return.
No, Louise, by the nature of EB-5, there is always risk. Certainly in the offering documents that one would sign, it will continuously highlight that your capital is at risk. And that is one of our functions, is to unpack the opportunity that a potential investor would be investing in, so that they clearly understand what risk profile they are exposing themselves to.
So, we earlier on in this year, obviously with the change of administration in the States, there's been a sort of a shift in the way in which immigration is being viewed. And from my understanding, middle of March, there was a new bill's been tabled and potentially sort of changes to the EB-500 visa program. Could we just look at those changes and how would that affect South Africans?
Louise, I mean, Trump was really a tough person to have in respect of immigration. I mean, he literally put bans on almost all legal and illegal immigration. And certainly now that we've got Biden in power, there's been already a number of reliefs in terms of immigration. A lot of the other visa categories are now marching forward again, thankfully. And certainly the Biden administration is very pro-immigration. I think what is of significance is that we've had two senators who were vehemently opposed to the EB-5 program, now come forward with a bill that they have put before Congress. And that's known as the EB-5 Reform and Integrity Act. The program in its current format comes up for renewal at the end of June. And we believe that this bill that's now being presented by Senators Grassley and Laley has got the support and is likely to be ratified. It's good news overall for within the EB-5 arena. It makes provision for a lot more scrutiny to be done around the operators of these various regional centers. It allows for independent audits from the SEC and other departments of Homeland Security, and just more tightening down and a far more stringent criteria related to it. But the other good news is that it gives the EB-5 a long-term extension for a further 5 years.
Does the length of the program, if you have invested in the program or you're looking to invest in the program now today, and I understand that it's approximately a 2-year timeline before you would have that green card and be ready to relocate. Would if at any stage of that 2-year period the structure of the visa program changes, how would 12 Star manage that process with you as an investor?
Yeah, so Louise, at the moment, the program sunsets at the end of June. So we always encourage our investors as we reach these various sunset dates to invest prior to the change. Once you've submitted and you've filed with immigration, if there are any changes, it has no effect. So at this stage, if people have got the ability to invest, now would be the time to do it until it sunsets, and then thereafterwards we will see what the landscape is like, and if there are any additional changes. But we don't foresee there being many changes. There were some overhauls to the program a while back where they increased the investment threshold from 500 to 900. They relooked at the definition of what is regarded as TEAs. So this bill really is more around additional compliance aspects, which is good news for EB-5.
As you mentioned, that increase from 500 to 900, that was in 2017, if I stand to be corrected. Do you in your current position see the threshold increasing again?
No, unlikely, Louise. I think it's reached its max. There has been a gradual slowdown by virtue of that massive increase, but we're seeing a demand return. And I think very importantly is that we've, with Caleo Capital, now designed some really unique financing options to finance the EB-5 at the 900 threshold. But I will allow Garth at the appropriate time to elaborate a little bit on the financing options that we've designed. It's quite unique. It means that you can keep your core portfolio under your control, and with some very clever instruments, Garth and his team can assist us in terms of financing your plan A or plan B into the US.
I would be very interested to hear that financing option. But before we get there, perhaps we could just take a look at some of the projects that you are involved in or that are underway currently. Luke, if you would mind popping up that slide for us. There's 2 projects that perhaps you could tell us a little bit more about, and how this investment would look.
Yep. Louise, we're using this as a case example. This is in the city of Hollywood in Florida. The developers had owned a large portion of this tract of land for many, many years. They acquired the site pre the subprime crisis. The subprime crisis came along, and they were going to just sort of wait it out and wait for the economy to return. And then they stumbled upon the EB-5 program. We've got great support from the City Redevelopment Agency here. And we through the EB-5 program have transformed the little city of Hollywood into quite an exciting destination. The project on the left-hand side was a $240 million capex project, 400 condo units, which are rental stock, ground floor retail, where we've got an anchor tenant being Publix. They signed a 20 plus 20-year lease. They're a Fortune 500 company. And then a small boutique hotel. That project was primarily developed through EB-5 investor money. And in fact, Shaun Minnie, our guest today, invested in that project. And then the one diagonally across is known as Block 40. Half the size, it's a $140 million capex project. Also a mixed-use accommodation of 177 residential units, ground floor retail, and then a very, very small hotel component. So if one just looks, I mentioned in my preamble that EB-5 really is a job creation project. If you look at the amount of jobs directly and indirectly that these two projects have created in the city of Hollywood, it certainly once again reaffirms what foreign capital can do to a small town like Hollywood in Florida.
Thank you very much. So just I know we have to keep our eye on time, but just my last question to you, Stuart, is looking at the size and the magnitude of those projects. Are you doing, or your organization is doing all the due diligence on the developers themselves, or are you working with a sort of network of developers? How does that process look from a security of investment point of view?
Yeah, so we do. We tend to like to have relatively small capex projects. So we've done a number of other projects besides those two case examples. But from a due diligence aspect, we typically will have an independent third party do due diligence. And in fact, in some cases, we have Caleo Capital just have another look and see. It's very important to understand that the developers have got sufficient interest in that project, make sure that there's bank involvement, and then understand that in terms of the number of EB-5s or investors that we're going to place in that project who are seeking immigration benefit, that project, in fact, is going to suffice in terms of the job creation requirement. Not all developments align themselves to an immigration benefit. So it's very important to identify a project that is going to align itself to an immigration benefit. So you can't go buy a block of flats in Florida and think that you can get a green card through aligning it to an EB-5. It doesn't work.
Okay, thank you very much, Stuart. So I'm so sorry, there's so many more questions I'd like to ask you, but let's leave a bit of Q&A time towards the end. And as you mentioned earlier, our guest star on today's webinar, and we're very, very grateful to have you with us, Shaun. I know it's quite early there on your side, so thank you very much for coming through this morning on your side. Shaun, I think we're going to jump straight into this, just bearing in looking at time. Immigrating to the US, what a step. It's a big step for yourself, for your family, and perhaps you could just give us a short little understanding of what some of the research and some of the preparation you did and why you chose the US and the EB-5 program.
Louise, good morning from the States, and it is a awesome undertaking in all regards. Personally, in terms of your professional life, your family life, it is a huge decision to make. We came to the decision over a period of about 2 years, and we made the decision in regards to the States and specifically the EB-5 visa, based essentially around the fact, as Stuart alluded to, that it was definitive in terms of getting a green card. So there weren't many other hurdles to cross once you'd actually entered the EB-5 environment. and that was an important criteria for me. And then in terms of the US, our decision was based around the fact that it's English speaking and that I felt I could establish a business in this environment. And those were really the drivers that led us toward the EB-5 option, and specifically the US.
You know, you say English speaking, that's something that after us discussing this process prior to the webinar and listening to it, thinking how you manage to go through it and immigrate when English is not the language of the country must certainly be very, very tricky. So at what point of your process, you've done your research, you made your selection of the US, you had been traveling to the US quite a bit, so you knew the landscape and had navigated the landscape. At what point did you start working with 12-Star Capital and Stuart?
Soon after deciding that the EB-5 was the manner in which we were going to relocate to the US, I started looking around for whom we believed could offer us the most secure passage to the US. The underlying investment is a fairly significant amount of money. It certainly was in our lives. So we wanted to be as sure as we can, and again, Stuart raised the fact that structurally it is an investment at risk, and I think that is a legal requirement of the process. But given that as a fact, I wanted to make sure that we were investing in something that had the best possible chance of returning our money at the end of the process. So we did our own personal due diligence, both in terms of Stuart's business, as I think everyone should, and in terms of the investment in the States. In fact, I employed an attorney to just do a due diligence for me on the investment in the States. And we looked at probably 3 options at the time, and Stuart was fantastic in the process, extremely honest in his answers. He certainly didn't candy coat what the process would be and how difficult it would be. So after a discussion with Stuart and 1 or 2 other people looking at the investments that they were offering, we were very sure that we wanted to move ahead with Stuart and the investment in Hollywood Circle.
So part of what we spoke about as well the other day was groundwork, that you was initially you put a lot of groundwork in, and in hindsight there was a couple of lessons learned when it came to your groundwork. Perhaps you could highlight those lessons learned, and if you could change, you know, we spoke a little bit about medical insurance and things like that. Perhaps you could just highlight some of those key points that you mentioned to us.
Let me start with the last bit. So to exist in the US, you need to get your social security number. You need to get a driver's license. With those 2 things, you can do absolutely everything. You can buy cars, you can buy houses, you can engage in business. A driver's license gets you to be a person in the US and recognized as such. The third and probably most challenging piece for us that someone should probably look at quite early on in the process is medical insurance. Medical insurance or medical coverage in the US is messy at best. It is very expensive compared with certainly our experience in South Africa, and just not easy to get if you're not moving into an employment situation. So those were certainly areas that certainly medical insurance was an area I would have spent more time understanding before we moved. It's obviously doable, but it takes a couple of months of work. And so for a few months, you're in a position where you're either extending your medical insurance in South Africa, and that requires you making a trip every 90 days, or you're outside of any medical coverage. So that was a challenge. Outside of that, I think everyone's situation is somewhat different. My personal challenges related to moving into a business environment, which was very different to what I had been in South Africa for 20, 30 years. Whilst I remained in real estate, the similarities are less so than you would think. There are significant differences in the underlying legislation, in just the nuances in terms of which people transact in the US is very different to South Africa. So that took probably a good 18 months, during which time I felt I lived in some phase of fog and not truly understanding how I move things forward. But thankfully, you get through it, and once you get your head around it, it's a big pond with significant opportunity.
Would you then have said that in hindsight, you could have perhaps set the business up sooner, or was that not really an option, as you have to wait for your green card to come into play before you can start setting up the business?
Louise, you could certainly have done better than I did, but I would also say that I'm not sure that there is a way to prepare completely for this move. I think you should rather get your head around the fact that it's going to take you 18 months to establish your life, establish business, establish your profession. Be patient in that process. Know that that's going to be a challenge. And once you get through that, I'm not sure that any amount of preparation will significantly change the fact that it's an investment of 18 months of your life to just relocate and set up your life essentially from scratch.
Louise, if I could just expand a little bit on that. When we sit down with a family, we always say, well, we want to understand what your objectives in terms of timelines are. And, whilst you're waiting for that adjudication to take place, which is that 2-year initial timeline, situations continuously change. There may be new business opportunities that arrive on the shores here in South Africa. So there is a fair amount of flexibility with EB-5. So in a lot of our cases, we have our clients approved, they go into the US, they activate their green cards, they come back to South Africa and either continue with their current business operations or allow themselves additional time to unbundle and at the same time really look around the US in terms of identifying the correct state that they want to live in, the correct profession, the correct business environment. So there is a lot of flexibility with the EB-5 investment visa program, so long as one retains legal status. It's not a pack up and leave for Perth type scenario. We do have the ability to manage timelines related to a family's specific objectives.
So, and I think that was quite important, Shaun. You also mentioned in our, previous discussions about the process of moving the family, of physically relocating, having the gas on, maybe don't travel with the pets, and a few other sort of anecdotes that you mentioned. Could you, just on a real life day-to-day, I've packed up my bags, I've arrived. Can you highlight a few important aspects? You mentioned schools, locating, anything that you'd like to add there?
Sure, and just to Stuart's point, he's absolutely correct. Obviously, the situation with us and what possibly posed a few challenges was during this process we had actually traveled over. We had initiated the green card, we got back to South Africa and expected to have a far slower transition. And at that point in time, Trump was happening. And so we spoke with our attorneys locally and they said, the safest thing you can do is get to the US now. Just get here, be here, and whatever happens, you're probably less likely to have any issues. So what was going to be probably a 12-month period for us became about a 3-month period in which we sold up, got everything together, moved it across to the States and arrived somewhat earlier than what was planned. So it certainly could be, I think, a little better plan than we had experienced. But nevertheless, the real life challenges that you need to consider is without social security number and without a driver's license, you can't do the basics like lease an apartment or put on your gas or switch on electricity, or you simply don't exist. So if you are able to get during this period that Stuart referred to, if you are able to travel across and get those things in place, those very basic issues make life a lot easier. So we did a few things right. We bought a car in advance. We were able to rent an apartment in advance. We couldn't get our gas and electricity on for several reasons, but we got that sorted within 10 days and we were able to move in. So as many of those very basic arrangements that you can get in place in advance probably makes the most significant difference to the first couple of months in the States. Schools are quite an important aspect in terms of the area you live in. There is strict regulation around if you're going to put your kids in public schools, and many of them are excellent, that you then select an area, a zip code in the US, which allocates certain schools in the area, and house prices, your rates and taxes are specifically aligned to the zip code and the quality of education in most cases in the areas you select. So I would be cautious in approaching where I live, understanding that then initiates a range of other decisions in your life. For instance, where your kids will go to school. The information available is fantastic. You can do all the research in advance. You can select schools, and based on that, you can select areas to live in, and then just make sure that you rent or buy in those areas.
Shaun, sorry, Stuart?
Schooling is a big factor, especially for a lot of our South Africans. We've had some cases where we've had families with special needs, children that need special needs, and the schools just cater for children like, unbelievably. They design specific curriculum around the child's needs. Schooling is just absolutely phenomenal in the US.
I'll point out though, Stuart, that you select the right area. Not all schools are equal, not all counties are equal, not all zip codes within counties are equal, but you're able to select that up front. You can get excellent schooling, and while many things in the US are a lot more expensive, great public schooling is almost free, so it's a significant benefit.
Just a personal question, Shaun, on your talking about finding the right area to live in and the right zip code. Initially, did you purchase a second home, or your primary residence, or are you renting your primary residence when you first moved?
We rented when we first moved because we weren't 100% sure that we had made the right decision in terms of where we landed. And we landed up in Tennessee, which in my wildest dreams was never an area that I considered. We were East Coast, West Coast. But after making several trips to both of those and considering a range of factors, cost of living, cost of housing, business opportunity, weather, schooling, we selected a couple of counties, and then within those counties selected zip codes that were ideal, and then initially looked to rent property in the area. And once we were here and we were settled and we knew it was the right area for us, then we bought a home in the same zip code to ensure that my little daughter Isabella continued at the same school and was uninterrupted in terms of what she was doing.
Sure, it's quite a couple of choices that I've made there. Before we move on to Garth, and I think it's really important we start looking at those sort of financial objectives and funding opportunities. Just a question to go back. You selected the EB-5 visa program because you wanted to start a business. Was this was obviously your primary driver, and how would you, if you had to comment on that process? I know you mentioned that getting up and going is trickier than what you've experienced in South Africa, but what type of support structure did you have? One from Top 12 Star and their associated partners, and then locally with the local community in the States where you moved in, what type of support was available there?
So the move is complex in all aspects. One of those is the sheer volume of documentation that's required. And in that regard, Stuart and his team were exceptional in guiding me through thousands of pages of documentation, often reaching back many, many years in terms of your business life, and specifically the area in regards to the capital that you'll be investing is something that the US takes a fairly deep dive into. And Stuart and the attorneys I worked with guided me through that process. So I think that was an important part of allowing me the freedom to think about this move in all aspects, and not just the financial and the investment part of it. In terms of local structures, there are quite a few. There's a big South African community in the Nashville area, and in most areas there are. We didn't lean on that heavily. We decided to establish ourselves as best we could as Americans, if you want, to kind of feel local. But we did get help from a few professionals in the area I spoke with in advance, people regarding the move over, real estate specialists. I set up bank accounts in advance and met a bank manager that I could walk into the bank and speak with, and did a couple of those things, which in hindsight I think made the move a lot easier, because we had people that we could call on to help us. So I think with Stuart and his team and the few contacts that I had made prior to the move in the US, it certainly facilitated the move being a lot smoother than I guess it could have been.
Thank you so much, Shaun. There's so much to unpack, and we could certainly chat to you and ask you so many more questions. But we do need to ask ourselves a very important question: is what are the opportunities when it comes to financing a move such as this? And what are these exciting sort of tiers that have been alluded to? So Garth, thank you so much for patiently waiting on the side there. I was hoping perhaps you could maybe introduce yourself a bit and your company, and then let's cut to the chase and look at the funding mechanisms for the EB-5.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody, and Shaun, good morning. I'm quite used to that time change. Sure, a lot of subject matter covered there, and I mean, I can just relate so closely to what Shaun has said on so many of those areas. And you'll notice Shaun always refers to Stuart and 12-Star. Shaun obviously left before my partnership with Stuart had developed. Otherwise, he would have mentioned me a lot more. Because our primary role is to take what Shaun had to find out for himself and bring that to the party. So not so much the soft issues, even though we delve into a very extensive process of why do you want to immigrate, when do you want to immigrate. Our process is to make the financial side clear and understand what you're getting into and what you have to plan for and how to live sometimes between America before you get over there. But Caleo Capital is an independent company, and I met Stuart, ironically, doing a due diligence on them when one of my clients, big clients of the family office, mentioned this EB-5 program. So we did our own independent due diligence, went through it, and from there we developed a relationship where a lot of our services were imperative to these people taking on this decision, because Shaun will tell you, the financial moving and the financial decisions is just one of the things. And I mean, even English in America is not English in South Africa. The language is different, and I see it in the financial circles because we are based in North America, and we are based in Europe, and we are based in South Africa. Even the spoken language of English is not always the same. So we create a platform to migrate your wealth, okay, by questionnaire, by saying, what do you want to achieve? What is your purpose of this? What are you fearful of? What is driving the immigration? But I always say to people, before you leave the country, you need to understand your money must leave, okay? Because you have a perception of risk around your financial future. It might be a business opportunity, but a lot of people are leaving because of financial fears and the financial state of South Africa. So that's where we assist with the wealth migration side of working with your existing structures, how to move those into the US, how to effectively keep a lot of the legacy planning you may have had and put huge amounts of effort over there, how to transfer that into the USA. And then your investment strategy, it's hard, as Shaun said, to go over there and start a business. But it's also hard in such a low yielding interest rate environment to find an investment that can produce an income while you find your feet in business. So our private equity division goes about finding business opportunities whereby capital can produce income and growth which is reasonable to that of a business growth. So that 15 to 20%, which seems so unrealistic at times. And that's where the investment strategy comes in. And then legacy, how to deal with this multi-generational transfer that we've established in the discovery process of why are you moving? How to deal with generations that are affected by your move to America. You might have, one of your family members in Australia, one in the UK, and you choose to go to the US. There might be a trust structure in Europe or in the Isle of Man or Mauritius. Now that American move creates an effect. So we plan all of those effects and we show you how to take a plan and how and who to inject from our network into that plan. And we have a vast network from discussions with our clients to go through those schooling. What Shaun did here is fantastic, but we also have that where we have 9 people in America that we put together with a professional from McKinsey to hold that group and to allow people to ask the questions about schooling and state tax, federal tax. What is the difference between this state and climate? And so, yeah, I think that's where we come in, but essentially a diversified financial services group. All of this to avoid the question, by the way.
Yeah,
all of this to avoid how to fund this thing.
Yeah, it was a very, very nice answer, though, I must say. But just to ask the question again, what, Stuart alluded to an interesting and exciting way to fund this immigration strategy. Would you like to tell us what that looks like?
No, I'd love to give you another question that avoids that answer. This is proprietary, and I don't know who's sitting on the other side of the screen, but let me put it this way. Often what people do is they are sitting in a position where they have to sell a lot of assets. I mean, let's be honest, on a 15-to-1 exchange rate, 901.8 million is a lot of money. So people often sit in a position where they've got to liquidate assets to afford this. So we went about finding ways to use those assets to create value in a very low interest rate environment. So you don't have to sell your offshore investments. You can create leverage and gearing against those in a very low interest rate environment, still get the market returns, but generate the capital needed to fund a residency-based program like this. I'm not going to go into detail, but that's the principle of it. You don't have to sell up everything to buy that green card, to invest in that green card. We create leverage off the assets that you've got in your current balance sheet in a very low interest rate environment, as low as 1.2%, to generate capital to afford that.
If we look at, I kind of get where you're going with that. So I just want to ask this question. So, we talk about financial immigration, and there seems to be kind of a mixed point of view on the terms financial immigration, whether it's should be done, whether it's possible, whether, what the taxation in South Africa and wherever you're financially immigrating to could be. Are you implying that you should completely financially immigrate if the opportunity arises? Or are you suggesting that you maintain your assets that you have locally and financially immigrate over time?
Okay, so let me answer that in a very simple way. If you were an American, you would be able to invest in South Africa. Okay, now the same remains true of a person moving over. You have this wonderful thing these days called a double taxation agreement. So while people think that they should financially immigrate, it's not always the best option. So you've got to analyze it. But the new rules have moved away from the South African Reserve Bank to the South African Receiver of Revenue. Now, what this is if you have been living an uninterrupted life in the US for 7 years, but you haven't left South Africa, They want to levy a taxation because you have essentially immigrated. The word financial immigration was invented by the financial advisory industry. It doesn't really exist. Financial immigration is where you give up your tax residency in South Africa and you move full tax residency to another country that you spend over a 5-year period or over a 1-year period more than 183 days a year. So we don't always recommend this so-called financial immigration immediately, because when you do that, when you're in that test phase of between South Africa and the USA, it can be very carefully managed. Remember this, when you immigrate from South Africa, in a formal immigration is the correct term, you pay capital gains tax on your assets, except fixed property. So you don't have to sell up everything. A trust is an independent entity. Fixed properties are not part of that, and often the biggest assets are property assets. So it is really about looking at your financial instruments and business assets and the ownership of that, and planning effectively from the double taxation agreement when to move you from one country to the other. And South Africans have a wonderful, wonderful loophole that nowhere else does it exist, to get assets into a legacy planning structure in the USA. And it's a fantastic benefit of immigrating to the USA. And as Stuart also alluded to, you have actually a long time. You don't have to do it as Shaun did with the fear of the Trump administration. You can actually phase this process over quite a long time frame. And we make sure that the financial planning over that time frame is very carefully calculated and plotted as steps.
Okay, thank you so much. You know, we're now, can you believe it? 45 minutes come and gone. And I just, I want to just, I know we're running now a little bit over time, but I just wanted to use quick 2 minutes or so just to cover a few of the questions that have come up. Please note this webinar is recorded so that you can go through this information at your own time. But a few questions which were frequently asked, perhaps Stuart, you could field the answer here, is, are you guaranteed the green card?
Yeah, so we tend to veer away from the word guarantee, but certainly in the offering documents that one would sign within an EB-5 investment, in the unlikely event that you don't get approved, your money would be refunded to you immediately. So we've never ever had the case. We have a 100% success rate, and that's just because of the intrusive nature of EB-5. If we don't feel your source of funds is going to meet the criteria, then we're simply not going to accept you into the company. So we do a fair amount of due diligence, and as Shaun mentioned, it's quite intrusive. So prior to us filing with immigration, we're fairly sure that you're going to get that green card. Also, we've never ever had a project failure. So, yeah.
The investment that Shaun made into Hollywood Circle, how long is the lifespan of that investment? And what happens when his investment comes to a close?
Yeah, so the lifespan of his investment is largely dependent on how quickly he goes through the immigration timelines. There are various immigration thresholds that he's got to meet. So the first timeline is waiting for the adjudication, for the approval. Then he would go to the second step, which is the consular step. Once he's finished at the consular step, he'd make his first entry into the United States. That activates the green card and social security cards. And then he goes into what's called the sustainment period, which is a period of a further 2 years. At the expiry, 90 days before the expiry of that first green card, he then makes another submission for the lifting of the conditional status. And once again, we're governed by USCIS timelines. And unfortunately, those timelines are very, very fluid, very difficult to gauge. But typically, these investments range between a 5 to a 7 year threshold, largely dependent on how quickly that individual goes through these various immigration hurdles.
Fantastic. I've got so many more questions. Sorry, Stuart.
When you look at the investment, typically the investment is a 2-year construction, which is where the job creation takes place. So 2 years of hard construction, that's normally where the applicant is going through the adjudication. Then the building will go into a stabilization phase. And typically that stabilization phase should be 2 years unless COVID comes along. And then the building is in the position to refinance. And typically we refinance and pay back the EB-5 money. And hopefully at that stage, the investor has gone through all his various immigration thresholds.
My last question before we, and just to note that we, there's a lot that needs to be covered. There's different ways in which this EB-5 can be, investment can be sort of, you can skin the cat for the lack of a better term. And so, and I think we will explore these other topics and other sort of aspects of the EB-5 in future discussions as we've now sort of running out of time. My last question, Stuart, just came to mind. If something goes wrong during this period, you've invested, you started your process, and somewhere along the way the wheels come off, and you want to pull out of the investment, is that possible?
It is possible, but bearing in mind that one would have to approach the managing members to explore an exit strategy. So people's circumstances continuously change. There may be deaths, there may be divorces. We've had a couple of those. It just depends at what stage the project is. Typically, these investment memorandums that the investors sign are quite one-sided. In other words, they're very much in favor of the managing members, the developers. But certainly, if there's the ability to cancel the agreement, find a replacement investor to take that slot, we do it. Very seldom.
I think it absolutely highlights the importance of going through this process with a reputable company that can manage it. I mean, Shaun, you've said that more than one time. Your relationship with Stuart has started from 2 years into the researching and the development all the way through, and you still have an ongoing relationship with Stuart and 12 Star Capital. So, having the right partner in this process seems to be a very, very important part of the process itself. So thank you so much to everybody for joining us this afternoon. I know that we're all looking forward to the Easter weekend coming up and having some time out with our family and friends. Thank you so much to the panel, Shaun, for getting up a little bit early. We appreciate it. And congratulations, and we wish you all the best with your business and your business interests in the US. We look forward to seeing what comes of them. And thank you so much for sending out the information. You'll be able to see Shaun's business interests on our website. We've included those links, and it's interesting to see what you've got up to there. To the rest of the team, Stuart and Garth, thank you so much for joining us today. We are recording the session. We will have the playback available to anybody that's interested. We'll also share it with everybody. And we look forward to our next webinar where we can expand more on this topic. Please feel free to send us your questions, and we'll make sure that they are included in any future discussions.